This is a tutorial on how to model an office interior in Cinema 4D. The image shown here is the result of a model I did, I think, round about 2 years ago. And I did this pretty much in a rush based on a grid that was lying on the floor. You can see it down here. It consists of a bunch of squares. And all I did was extruding up this grid to the ceiling, because up there you can see the same squares all over again. And after extruding it, I cutted some loops along the walls to get windows. And what makes the technique I want to show you so fast is that I reuse polygons for more details. For example, the lamps up here or the ventilation system just consists of these squares again that are just cut up. And the pillars here consists of the squares on the floor. So that makes a really nice model in the end with good proportions. Architects do that pretty much the same. And you can, I used the pin, like I don't know how to call it, but like the pin board here, out of the polygon from the wall, and the pieces of paper even come from the surface of the pin board. And so I would like to show you my workflow. For that, we just go to 3D view, and the first thing, I don't use the cube object so much when I start with a model, but rather a polygon. So you can create a polygon here, and I don't really like this blue color. I think it's too dark, so I cannot see any details later on. So I go to Mode, Project, and change it back to gray. Apart from that, I think it's quite important to be able to see the topology of my model. So let's display Gouraud shading lines so I can see all the edges. If you want to have more information about how many points and edges your model has and how many of them you just selected, you can go to Mode, and then there should be View Settings. You can also press Shift V on your keyboard, and here you can just go to HUD, and so you get displayed the total number of objects, the total points, edges and polygons, and the same with selected point, edges and polygons. So these are the main things I always have checked, and later on when we convert our geometry, they will be displayed. For example, if I click on my polygon again and convert it, then I can switch to point modes and it shows all the points there are. And once I select another one of those points, it says you have 4 points in total and one of them is just selected. So you might think, why do you need that information? It's kind of obvious. And well, it is in this case, but there will be situations in where you are, like, depending on the view angle, where you cannot be so sure whether anything is selected or not, and then sometimes I can just quickly check, okay, 1 point is perfect, or no, like I need 2 points, and this is a great help with more complex models. And another thing that's essential for modeling quickly is to have shortcuts. I created a tutorial on how to customize Cinema 4D a few months or maybe 1 or 2 years back. And if you want to be able to change quickly between points and edges, then you should think about using shortcuts. You can read here in the rectangle, shortcut 4, 5, and 6 is what I've chosen. Same for model is 7, for selecting is 9, for selecting rectangles is 0, and that's pretty much of what I use, apart from another shortcut. Let's just delete polygon, and when I press 1, I automatically get a polygon, which is the base for most of my models. So now back to what's the advantage of using a polygon over a cube. It's simply that when I have a cube, I get maybe more polygons than I actually need, and even worse, the axis is in the center of the cube. So when I create a polygon, I can still make a cube out of this, but the axis is on the floor, is like on the bottom of the object. So this saves me some work. And you might think that's like picking small advantages, but in fact it's quite essential. If you look at it, when I choose a point, for example, then I can read here down in the coordinates its height, like it's 65 units compared to the axis, which is on the floor. And I can later on use this for working precisely, which is essential for us architects. So let's just have a look at it again. I can just create a polygon, and I might cut it up. Real quick. I can subdivide it several times, so it's basically a grid. And I can subdivide it smoothly, so I can use it as a base for more organic things. And so on. We'll do this in not in a hurry like now, but properly. But to me, this was and is the quickest way of just creating geometry in no time. There will be alternatives, but this was for me just the quickest. All right. In this case, I will not use a polygon now, but a grid. Why do I do this? Because the polygon has one disadvantage. I cannot divide it easily. Like if it's non-square, I get problems. Like you can see here, I have distortions I cannot get rid of easily. The alternative would be to just use UB for this kind of selection, then MF for doing like this, then you go in UI and UI and MF again, and make sure it's like square shaped, but maybe I'm wrong. So for me it's easier to just use a plane in this case. And I want my office to be 5 meters in this direction, 8 and then 5 in this direction. And for testing I just use 80 and 50 units. So this means any square has a shape of 10 centimeters in this case. I could also look that up by converting it, clicking on the polygon, and just looking here, it's 10 by 10 units. This is obviously not what I wanted, so I just go Control Z or Command Z to redo this, and I will again use 8 by 5 meters and go 80 by 50. And now to make those little squares 5 times bigger, I just divide it by 5 and by 5. So this is supposed to be like the main grid for all I do to create the office. So if we wanted to, we could keep this and call it original. And I would like to disable the original and use the other piece here. I convert it using C on my keyboard, and now I just select all the polygons we have. So the next thing I do is I duplicate this and call the geometry I had before to floor, because it's pretty much gonna stay like that. And the new file will be created for the ceiling, so it's maybe 2 meters 80 high, or maybe a bit lower, 240 will do. And now I have two kinds of pieces. I have the ceiling here, I have the walls, and the floor is another object. The floor is this guy, and this is my ceiling. So luckily, after extruding, the top part is still selected. So I can make a distinction between the ceiling and the wall pieces by pressing UP and delete. What I got now is two objects. This one is the ceiling, and this guy is the walls. And this is the floor. And the only thing we disable now is the origin, like the original grid, in case I still need it, but I don't think so. So the floor can be kept like this. If I want to disable the walls and the ceiling because they are in the way, I can just stroke over both objects, like not releasing the left mouse button, but just here now, and do this again, another stroke, and they are disabled. So the floor is pretty much gonna stay the way it is. If I wanted to get rid of all the unnecessary detail, I can just select all polygons using Command A, and then I press UZ, so it's just keeping the edges. And I always check using the point mode whether there are any points left over. But the function I just used, namely UZ, deleted those points for me. So this is okay. Let's disable the floor and activate the walls. Here you can see that there are points left over by extruding, And the quickest way of getting rid of them is a function called optimize. You can get there by pressing UO, and it's what this function does is we can look into the function if you press U Shift O. What it does is it's checking whether there are double polygons, whether there are unused points floating around, and it checks for points within that tolerance if they are lying on top of each other or at least very close to each other. But I already did UO without calling up this window, so anything's fine now. And now let's check the ceiling, and you can see there are no spare points, and I already have the grid that's so valuable for what I have in my mind. But first of all, let's have a look at the walls and my image again. I have the windows and they are not like down to the floor, but there is some space in between, and there even is some space for a heating system in front of my windows. So what I will do is I will just select these polygons here and only cut them up because like the back wall, for example, is still intact. You can tell by the cuts here that I didn't keep that in mind before. So it's basically up to us what we do, but we can cut them all up. But the thing that's more important is the orientation of the polygons. You can tell by the blue color that they are pointing outwards, but our camera is inwards, and so we should just switch the polygons using UR. So make sure all our objects are pointing in the right direction, so the ceiling should be pointing downwards, UR, and the floor is alright. So how to cut up the walls quickly? You just go to edge mode, press UB, click in there, and the next thing you use is MF. So cutting through these in a regular manner is just done by holding down your left mouse button, and this is the opening for the windows later on. I could control it here with %, like where they are placed exactly, and I could even change the scale right here, but this is too imprecise because I want to work with proper units. So I just keep it the way it is, doesn't matter. And I grab the loop cuts I created here one by one, going to edge mode if I'm not in it anymore, clicking with UL for loop selection on this bottom part here, and I check the coordinates here. At the moment I'm in object mode, but I can switch to world mode, which will be the same because the axis of my object is on the floor. But just to make sure, I keep it at world now, and the bottom line I just selected is at 80. So if you wanted to, just for a test, we can put it up to 90. And you can use the other guy or select the other guy using UL and put it right, maybe to 2 meters. If I wanted to lower this, I could even say like 60, but this appears a bit low to me, maybe 70. Let's have a look. And yeah, maybe 90 wasn't too bad, or yeah, 85. So the next step is to you know what, it might have been better to just cut up the walls in this region, so we can quickly go back to this state where nothing is cut and select the polygons here. And now we use UP again and delete right afterwards, so we have two parts of walls, like inner ones, I call them walls inner, and walls outer. And the outer walls get the same procedure again. I ring select those edges, press MF, make two subdivisions in there, select the bottom one, and now I can show you something, a new thing rising up. Like here it's not selecting whole rings anymore, but it's creating like the rings in itself, which I don't want. So I just say stop at boundary edges. So now it just cuts from here to there. I can use 85 here, select the other guy and go to 200. Yeah, maybe 190 and this 80. The next thing is when I model, I should anticipate and I should think about what edges do I have here and what edges do I need. So maybe the windows look better if they are not in a 50 by 50 grid, but they have two, they occupy two fields. Like I would use pairs like those, and those, or like those, and those. And I should think about how much space I leave in between. And yeah, this should work. If I just delete either using my UZ trick again, like here, UZ, so I have like proper openings for my windows, or going back, I could delete the edges like UL again and say any other edge will be removed by using Shift C, and now I type dissolve. That way I kind of made my grid a bit lighter, and now I could just check whether I want those windows here or just those ones. And the trick is always the same. Once I selected those guys, I can make windows out of that. So let's prepare that by going to D for extrusion and making them go outwards by 20 units. And for my heating system, I choose the bottom guys here, and I go UP again, and in this case I do not delete, but I use the double ones for moving them outwards. And with Alt D you can display your axis, and you can see here that the axis is still in the center of the object, but my actual heating system is located here. So if I wanted to move the axis to the heating system, I would need to press, for example, L and move it there. Holding down Shift, I can make sure it's 250, which looks just perfect. And this stuff only works if you work with numbers. So if you're always restricting yourself in a good manner, in a good way, to using like 10 units or 5 units all the time, so that way all your model will be much cleaner. For example, I should press L again to leave the axis moving mode. When I move this, I can just hold down Shift after I move the arrow a bit, like I start moving it and then I go Shift. And if I wanted to have a proper like distance to the ball, like say 50 units, then I can just use that and it will be always clean. But in this case, it's supposed to be a tiny little gap. Maybe not even 10 centimeters, but maybe like 48, so it's a tiny gap. And the heating should be a little lower. So we could either now scale it just freehand, like pressing T for scaling and just doing that kind of thing, as another advantage of having the axis at the right spot. You can press Shift here to make it 90%. But again, what's 90% of 85 units? So you might want to know the height of this edge. And if I cannot select it, like this guy doesn't really work, then I can use UM for just stroking over it in the top, and now I can see its height is 72 units, and maybe I want to put it at right at 80 or maybe 75. So I can use precise numbers. Same here, I might want to leave a gap by 5 units, and then I'm almost ready to extrude that stuff. What I would like to do is to use fields again. So I would like to kind of delete some edges. So when I now go to dissolve, let's have a look whether dissolve has a shortcut. I might overlook it, but if you don't know the shortcut or you don't have one, just like me, I think, you can still use Shift C and just type dissolve and press enter. So this is kind of irregular. I have like 3 big fields and a small one and those bits here, but well, it's just a demonstration, so let's not overdo it. And usually if I want to show that this kind of thing is split up, I should make it visible, because when I render this now, all these edges are invisible. If you just look at this, it's just a straight line, like it looks like one polygon basically. And if I want to split it up, I have an option which is like selecting those edges, going MS, and that way I can open up little gaps. And another essence to good looking models is to have good control over your edges, like over your gaps. If you always use the same value for this kind of stuff with similar objects, and if you have a feeling for how far these gaps should be, then your model will look a lot better. So let's go back to polygon mode, and now I can show you something really great. And this is that the big polygons are still selected and the gaps are not. And this is only because I had the polygons selected before. So let's go back. This is what you really should keep in mind for speedy modeling. If I have like the heating here, I mean I could do like these gaps here and go back to polygons like this, but it used to be like that. If I don't have any polygons selected and I just use edge mode, I open that up and I go back to polygons. Okay, that's new with Cinema. It kind of automatically selects the right thing for me. Okay, so please forget this tip. Now they solved this for us. That tip doesn't apply anymore. So all we need to do is select the edges, press MS, create our tiny little gaps, go to polygon mode, and now we press UI for inverting our selection, so all the little gaps are selected, and delete them. So now you press UI again and you have the big pieces again, and then you can extrude them. But be aware that you use a proper value, and there are backsides to be created. So we just click create caps, and that way we have backsides as well. Without those caps on the back, it wouldn't be a closed model. And if you zoom to the gaps, you can see it worked now. We have actually like two separate objects, at least in the physical way. In our hierarchy, they are still one object, but now they look like they are separated. And for nice architectural renderings, you need well-defined gaps, as I said. By the way, if like the ceiling is in the way, you can click on them twice here, or another trick, just hold down Alt before you click in those guys, and you can change those buttons like in one go. What I always do after having created gaps is bevel those guys, like all the edges. At least if I have like a primitive box shape, I can just select all the edges and go to MS, go real close, and just make something tiny like 0.1. That might not be visible from far away, so let's check. Well, that's too tiny, so let's go 0.2 and render them out again. And those little highlights are very valuable for our rendering later on. You can also experiment with some subdivisions, but yeah, this looks even better but creates more geometry. So let's do it like this. This is for our heating. And I'm not going to detail this any further because it's not really in our scene. But what's more interesting is to work on with the windows. Maybe the heating is located a bit too low. So if I wanted to change this kind of thing, I could lift it up like the whole thing, a few centimeters, but yeah, we'll see that later on. Now for the outer wall, I select all the windows, and with I can make an extrusion inwards. If I uncheck preserve groups, I can do so for each window separately, and always use straight numbers like 4. And what you should keep in mind before you work on is that this piece is still connected to the windows. So if you want to have an easy life, just go back and split this selected geometry up now, like using UP, and delete. And now we have a remaining object which is called windows. Now I select all the polygons again, go inwards by say 4 units, and yeah, that's all I did. We can extrude them outwards, but now we have to uncheck create caps, and I always go in, I only go inwards like a few centimeters, so you can just tell these are windows, maybe like 4 units, but that's about it. And then I press UP and delete again to have glass. So let's go on with this game and copy paste using Command C, Command V, and this kind of guy is giving shadow. It's kind of shadowing our windows, and you would just go back to object mode, this guy, and move them outwards slightly. So let's just move this inwards quickly and just move them outwards so they are kind of floating in the air now. I put them outwards 20 centimeters, but we can still move them later on. And now you can see that it's possible to work on multiple polygons at once, even they are separated. Like I just go to edge mode and run across all the long edges, and now I use MF, cut through there, then I go UI MS to bevel them without any subdivisions, pressing polygons, inverting and deleting those polygons. So this might be an element you would do on the outside, like this kind of thing, going to all edges and beveling those guys. But in this case, I want something lighter, so I go back until the state where I had the tiny bits deleted. And now what I need is only the lower edges like this guy and so on. And how do I delete them? The easiest way is looking from the side, like here, and going to the rectangle selection, removing that gizmo with Alt D, and make sure that I have only select visible elements disabled. So that way I should be able to get my edges. With F1 I go back to 3D perspective, and now I can move the Alt D, I can move the lower parts, so I actually have like something like something that shades my window. I go to polygon mode and extrude this, or I can be even better and go back to edge mode and only select the short pieces now, viewing from top. I can use my rectangle tool again and I have all of them selected, and now I hit MF and I should use a really low value now, like 2, and now I select all the polygons and I only want the middle parts. So maybe UK helps. No, it doesn't. UK was for shrinking my selection, but then the next way to only keep the middle polygons is to look from top again, maybe using Control Tab to make this really big. And now I try to select only the middle parts with my rectangular selection, and there I go, going back to F1 and Control Tab to minimize that. I'm sorry for that. Control Tab worked this time, and what I want to do now is just pushing those polygons up. I can change the modeling axis of my move tool for that by using axis, and there should be selected. Oh, excuse me, this is okay, but orientation is what I want to change, namely to normal, and that way I can precisely move them up and down, so now they are slightly bent. So now let's select all the polygons again and extrude them with polygon mode and D for extruding. I can just do this, make sure the caps are activated, and now it really depends on the viewer's distance. I think this is okay, but if you really wanted to, you could bevel some edges here. But be aware, if you now select all the edges and go MS for beveling, then you're beveling those parts too. This is not what you want, and to be honest, well, you could work on with doing lots of loop selections here, but let's keep the shades the way they are. So what is a quick way of doing like chords, like holding those things? It's probably using or deactivating the shades for now and using the glass pieces again. Going UP, moving them 20 centimeters to front, going to edge mode, and you know what? When I want to save time, I sometimes don't select what I want, namely this, this, and this, but what I do instead is just selecting what I don't want, and then I invert it. So what I would like to do is going MF, and now I want to use those edges for chords. And I'm not quite finished yet. I should use the scale function this time. And maybe select those guys. Going MS. And this is the width. Oh no, let's do it even differently. Let's convert those selections without any beveling to splines, which can be done with tools maybe. No, it's mesh, and then there should be spline. And the funny thing is that it has to do with splines, but it's not listed among the splines, and it is a command called edge to spline. So what I get is a spline which looks like this. You can see here that it has top and bottom points, and now we can do a little experiment, namely sweeping a tiny little profile, a six-sided tiny profile will do along these splines. So this is the path, like chord path, and this is the chord profile. And now let's see whether this can be swept. Fantastic. So if you think they are too straight, then you can select all the points and subdivide them using US, 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 maybe one more, and then you want to kind of jitter them around just a tiny bit. You know those chords are never really straight, so go ML and use crumple. Hit apply to see better what we're doing, and I use crumple axial, so that way I can keep this almost straight, but I can manipulate it in that direction slightly. Maybe like so. Let's have a look. This is the effect I get, and it's different on every chord. This might be too extreme, but we'll see later on in conjunction with the shades. And now I can move the whole thing so I should make sure that the axis is where my objects are. If I don't want to move it by hand, I can also use the commands to position the axis to center of this object. This doesn't work because it's located probably here. So moving that, I can show you the trick later. So let's hit L again and move them outwards, and now that way I can just make them run through there. Well, usually they should be placed outwards further, but this is a step I should have thought of a bit earlier. Of course, you can correct that. I can show you like what you could do is choosing the paths like this, and then you have a size showing the distance. So I could go like 20, have a look if that looks better, and then I can go and say 20 for everything. So for each 2 chords I do this. So you see my modeling workflow is a bit of a combination of anticipating and things, so I just plan stuff. So the distance from here to there you got me, is more like combining or anticipating stuff, and at the same time being hopefully able to correct some mistakes quickly. Okay. This is how far we got. Don't forget to save your scene. And like here. And I always use glow shading lines so I can see whether anything is okay. If you want to see your work better, you could already start with changing some settings in terms of ambient occlusion or so to see the gaps better, but I leave that for now, and I call my sweeps chords and put them below my shades, and I deactivate the visibility of both of those guys. So for the windows I can choose edge loops, maybe for without having selected anything, and I should just select all these guys. You can either do it, the way I just did it, clicking on them, or I would like to show you another trick. You can also select stuff that's easier to select. Oh no, in this, sorry, we'll just do it by hand in this case. And you can also now use MS for beveling again, just to make this look a little nicer. Yeah, that will do. And what else do we need? I cannot say if it's a demo, so what else do we need? Oh yeah, I kind of pushed them together, leaving the chords. We can do that too. Let's just position our access center. Where we can actually use it, and I would place it right on top, pressing L before I do so, moving it 180 to top, or no, maybe just 10 more centimeters, and now I remove L, like the axis tool, and I can move them up. Probably not quite the way it is in reality, but works for me. And what I wanted to do was disabling this wall, keeping this wall, and well, not so happy with that. Maybe we do it halfway then. Okay. What's our next thing we want to change? It's maybe the walls here. If you want to have something simple, then we could change these walls here. For example, in order to extrude something by 30 units without creating caps, we get a piece of floor we can maybe use later on for something, and same here, so that's okay. But you could also go back and create a cut, right, maybe just one, and go UL, stop at boundary edges, and place it on 2 meters. So the same size, like 190, and then I could do something like a little bay, so to speak, like those inwards there, and later on we can use UP again, delete this, and use maybe the same trick again. Put this to 190, 180, and you may want to place a door in there. And with doors there's something special, because if I want to extrude them first inwards, then I need to create preserved groups again, and the bad thing is that it creates me 2 polygons down here, so I would have to remove them and to select those two guys here, those edges, and set them to 0 in world coordinates. But I don't want to have a door like this. I would like to dissolve this guy again using Shift C and dissolve. And now I have a door I can use, like extruding it outwards first, 3 centimeters, then inwards, 6 centimeters, and now it depends on how much you want to go into detail, but we could at least place this on 0 again, and it would be quite easy to detail this even further, like using D and I and D 1,000 times, and you could again op this, UP this, I mean delete this, use the new piece, and cut this with UB, cut stuff in there, select all the polygons, go inwards, but this time without preserving the groups, and using D again. But that's probably not the style of you're going for in that kind of office. But I just wanted to show you, if you are for more classical stuff, just think of D and I and so on. So what we will do is just creating something like this. And if you want to have at least some geometry in front of your door, use UP again, and this could just look like a knob. I will use like the direct way to give size for that, like 12 by 8 or so, or maybe 16 by 12, and then I can kind of move it where I think it should be located, and maybe use this, like extruding this to another cube thing or so. But maybe we do it a little differently, like I move it outwards, let me see, 10 centimeters, and I cut through there using K for knife, a loop, and now I don't need to do this precisely, I think, because it's just like a placeholder geometry, and extrude this like that with caps. And I take the back polygon here, I hold down Control to deselect the bigger one, and now I extrude again by, let's say, 5 centimeters. So I take the whole object, and this time I want my axis right here. So again, I would use the axis command, and then I go axis center. So there are two functions, like there's command axis center, center axis 2, that puts it right in the middle. But what I want is a more sophisticated way of positioning the axis center, namely by axis to it doesn't go live, so auto update, there we go. So I can place it right here using -x, -z, and -y and +z. So when I execute this and close it, it sits right where I want it, and this gives me great control over placing it right where I need it. So if you're afraid this is too dirty, then just select this very polygon, check its coordinates like x 424.5. I copy this and I get like this other piece here and paste this inside. So this sits perfectly on the other polygon. Okay, but that was kind of just a freestyle thing. If you think it's too rough, then we could go on like selecting all edges apart from this one. With Control I can deselect stuff, and now again we should set back the orientation to object. And if you have a hard time deselecting stuff, then you can decrease the radius here. It works like typing in there like 2, then you have like just a small needle for deselecting. Or you can also hold down the left mouse button and scroll up and down to make it bigger or smaller. I have to do it for the bottom part. I can press S to see anything I have selected and then delete this stuff. So now when I go MS with only the outer edges selected, I can make this look a bit more interesting. Okay. If I wanted to prepare the other parts of this model, I can just like click on the floor pieces because they belong to the other floor. So I just take them out, press UP, delete, and select the old object and call it floor. And this should be a part of this floor. I can just put it underneath so it gets the same texture. No one will probably notice. Technically, it would have been better to keep the floor like divided, and then I can kind of fuse those polygons together. If I wanted to do this, I still have a copy of my floor. I copy paste it, it gets pasted up there. So let's delete the floor I had changed and use the new original floor. This is my floor piece, and I still keep the original here. So floor and floor piece are supposed to be one object. Like you can see, this guy is only that bit and that's the big floor ending there, but I want them to be connected. So I just select both of them, right click and go connect objects and delete. So what this does is it's just keeping one object and putting all the polygons together in it. So now anything is solved. And I could still put them all into one object using selecting all of them and pressing UZ. So then I get kind of this thing here, which is okay, still one object. Or I can go back and by the way, if you ever want to create an outdoor scene, like maybe this is not inside an office but in front of it, then you could just use such a grid to create a pavement. Maybe you just watch and you don't have to do it for the office model, but it works like this. I have no subdivision and I only create a tiny gap here. I go UI for deselecting the opposite, Command A for getting all of them, and now before I extrude them to get proper proper objects on the floor, I can use ML again to make them go a little crazy. With the tool activated, just stroke over both, and now I could like mess them up a bit, mainly in this direction, so they are not really, you can see they are not really lying straight. Like I can have a tiny variation here, and then I go to extrude stuff. With caps activated, I can make them 2 centimeters thick. Go to all edges and use MS again. And that way I have a pavement. Let's have a look. This is what it looks like. So you can see I overdid it with the gaps, but like the total impression is more interesting than just the regular grid. So again, how did I do it? I just put it like this time with tiny gaps using extrude inner. Then I go inverted, delete those parts, the gaps. Then I go Command A, extruded, maybe 2.5, select all the edges. Oh, excuse me. When I have all the polygons selected, I go ML and apply some variation in height. Then I extrude it. Then I select all the edges and go MS for beveling. Bevel it slightly by maybe 0.2. And I really don't like this highlighting at all because I cannot see my work. But now I can. So this is a way of doing like stuff for your garden. Also keep in mind that you are creating a lot of geometry with those kind of mass functions. But it's a neat trick anyways. Okay. Sorry for getting off topic. And we're going on with the ceiling. The ceiling so far consists of just the regular grid. I typed NG to get in wireframe mode. I use NA for just seeing it like that, and NB for a combination of both. So how can I turn this really boring polygon up there to something which looks quite lively, like this here. You can guess it's done with extruding inwards, extruding outwards, cutting it up with ML like this. Those tricks here for the ventilation is pretty much the same with it with the shading, with the window shades. It's just split up and then move the edges on the bottom. So the ceiling can basically be created by selecting all the polygons and extruding inwards. Two centimeters will do. And this time we should not delete the little gaps. Instead, we should just separate the gaps from the fields by using UP delete. So that way we have ceiling fields and ceiling gaps. So the gaps selected look like this, and we should extrude them downwards slightly. Looks like this then. And just an advice, architectural modeling is all about like having the right measurements. So you really should check a lot whether the measures you use are realistic. So sometimes it's just a millimeter or maybe 2 millimeters and it looks believable. And sometimes it's maybe a little bit more than 2 millimeters and it doesn't look believable anymore. So you really should check your work for that. Another thing we can do is optimizing our geometry before extruding, because if you look at this, I have a hard time now to bevel my structure because it's just beveling all of it, which is not really what I want. Although it looks interesting, I have to say, it is not what's actually going on up there. So we should go back to the state where it used to be all flat and just press UZ here. So we have a simplified version, and then when I select this simplified structure, I go UR for giving it the right orientation. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. I will see when I extrude it using D, and now I extrude it without creating caps. And here I use a value of 0.1. Keep in mind that the direction was wrong, so I have to UR and D it again. And this time when I, when I extrude it, it should be the right direction. But to be honest, it's not too important. I can still switch them, like maybe 2 millimeters. And now I turn them around. UR is supposed to reverse them. Not quite sure why it's still blue, but let's ignore that for now and try to select all the edges and go MS. And okay, here I created a problem because the beveling doesn't work on this kind of structure. In order to analyze what's going on, I remove nearby geometry and render over this, which this looks okay. And the beveling, let's try it again, of course with a value which is lower than the actual geometry thickness. 0.5, no subdivisions. 0.05. Chamfer 0.5, and it's kind of not looking the way I expected it. MS in here leads to something bad. So let's just go UE to make this structure consist of quads again. UE was it, and then with MS I can try again, and this time it works. So now you see some shading running across from light to dark over a flat surface, and this is because those bevels here are really small and the fields or the polygons next to it are really big. And to work against that, we can reduce the Phong angle to say 20 degrees, and that way, maybe less, that way our gaps will look fine. Let's see, and I still have those edges. So below 17 looks okay. Maybe I should have done the beveling a bit different. Let's save some geometry and do it with just no subdivision and with a really low Phong angle. But you will see that it still makes a difference when you have like a tiny shiny edge running along. Now let's see the fields again, and it's always good to have something going on between the geometry and the actual, how to say, the actual fields. But like a gap like this will make it possible to look outside of our building, and we should cover that up too. So either we model it proper, or we put the fields down again, or I have to rethink my beveling. But so far I think it's the most easiest thing to just lift it up slightly, the gaps by 0.2 is too much, but maybe 0.2 or 5. we'll close it again. But in some cases, gaps are good, but let's leave it like this. So next I have the fields. And you should always make sure that your ceiling looks interesting. Sometimes it's not that easy. And we should think of a structure, like where there is ventilation going on and what's the pattern. So here I have like each fourth piece, like there are always three in between, and I have to make sure I don't collide with those kind of pillars. So I should even make the pillars first before I create a pattern. So the floor is still good for that. And let's see it from top. Like I disable the fields and the gaps. And the structures or the pillars should have something to do with our room. I think like they should be orientated towards the windows, or have at least some kind of relation here. And yeah, let's just extrude it by the room height, which maybe was 240. Let's look from the side. Here they are, so it's 240 is okay. And we don't need the top bits. And we should isolate the pillars with UL for loop selection and hit UP delete. And in lacking of another word, I just call them pillars. Please note that we damaged the floor now, so if you want to be super clean, then you should have copied the floor before, but that way I can show you how to close gaps. So just go MD for closing and you get like this. If you go close to the edge and just click left, then they are closed. Of course they haven't gained that structure, so let's try this option here. So I go back, hit quadrangle, and as expected it's messing it up. So you could either help a little by doing some work for it, going MF again, and then you try MD, but it's doing it the way it wants. So we could also just go MD and use n-gons, and then select the whole thing and go UE. Or we could just use the knife and cut the long way, and then try UE, or go MF. And there you go. But this is something you should avoid. This like kind of fiddling with your geometry because you messed up stuff is often a result of not thinking about stuff or being unconcentrated or of having a bad workflow. Well, back to the ceiling. And also maybe those pillars are a bit bold. I only used one field here, and in my recent model I did two. So what can we do about that? Some more fiddling. Maybe we move it back a little. And I use move, like E, move it, hold down Shift, and now I collapse. See that guy? Those edges collapse now. And because this is really dirty, I should select anything and go UO to make sure those double edges and double points get removed. Okay. Of course, the pillars are not really sitting on the middle of the grid, and in order to have a clear pattern up there, I will keep it that way. So now let's select some pattern. Okay, this ceiling pattern should not collide with the kind of pillars underneath. So our pillars are located a bit hard to see really, like here. And where else? And here. So we can put our patterns anywhere but here. And in the picture before, I had to put them close to here. And this worked quite well. But to be honest, this picture here was like better prepared, obviously, than the tutorial I'm just doing. So let's just see how this pattern can be resolved. Like we could start here and there, just to make sure we can delete those guys so we see better. Doesn't do much harm, so let's just click a pattern. So it's 3 in between each field. And yeah, we can use that. I just go up and delete. So these are our lamps. Just for an example, and the other guys are located like 2 off and 1 in front. 2 off, 1 in front. If I'm right, it was like this. And here and there. UP delete, and this is the air condition. So let's just go inside the room and see what we're doing. It's basically the fields. They are, if I render this out, they can stay the way they are. They only need textures someday. And the lamps are the next thing we're gonna work on. And we should build them up out of 2 things. A kind of grid and like a box where there's space for some bulbs. So I think I even did some others running across there, so let's start. We watch it from top. And you know what happens next is going MF again. And let's go back because we should copy the lamps beforehand and just use those guys. Go MF, maybe like that. UI for changing, MS for going in there, offsetting it slightly, and ending extend. Nope. All these tools were kind of modified in the recent version, so or maybe I'm wrong, we cannot keep this bit here using that technique, so let's see how we can do it. Oh yeah, we could, that's maybe the right thing to do anyway, is to extrude them inwards, just a tiny bit, 0.5 centimeters, and extruding them upwards, like so. And not quite sure, maybe those lamps were kind of like this. You know, like not straight, but like so, if we wanted to. Or yeah, there's lots of things we could change about that. And if you just want to have the same thing going on again, we could be really cheeky and just use a copy of that and turn it around, but that wouldn't work on the other parts. Or we can be a little less cheeky and just make another copy of the lamps and redo some parts, but this time the other way around, UI, MF with the same value, selecting all polygons, going inwards again, all the values are still there, and extrude them. Same value, and then we just put them up very slightly, like maybe 4 millimeters. No, that's maybe a whole centimeter, and that way we can create something which should look okay. This could be a lamp somehow, and you know about that problem, like those inner edges should be removed, and at the same time here too. So let's try to correct both at the same time, selecting them, looking at them from the side, go into polygon mode, rectangular selection, only select visible elements deactivated, and just the bottom ones. And now we go UZ, and then we go UE. That's a way of saving polygons. So select them all and go UR. And if UR doesn't work, then we can try UA. And now they are all facing in the same direction, but the wrong one, so UR. There we go. So you can keep in mind UR is reversing the normals in whatever direction they show, and UA is an automated way of aligning normals, which works good for us. Yeah, beveling is too much work for me now, and we should make sure we have some room up there for our lamps later on. So maybe we delete the top bits and make a separate kind of box over it. And as far as I know, it only is of interest for those guys here. And the box can be created out of the third copy, or the second copy rather. And this should cover the whole geometry just fine. We don't need a cap here, so it remains open, and we have enough space for the lamps. And to be honest, you're not gonna see what's going on in there, so you should always consider where your camera is located and if you really need that much detail, like somewhere no one cares. So for what I like, this is sufficient. Yeah, it's just okay like that. And it gets a little bit more complicated with the other parts, like these are the lamps only. We can put them together into one. And the air condition is of course a bit more tricky. Let's have a look at the polygons there. The air condition is, hope I didn't delete it. That'd be funny now. Like, we have those fields. And where is my air condition? So, it claims to have 60 objects in total, and it says it has 132 polygons, and 8 polygons for the air conditioning. Here they are. Seems I kind of overlooked them, but these are the guys. And now how can you create a structure like that? Basically it's a pyramid which is cut in several ways, so we just need to extrude it, move it upwards, and then we go on. Let us see how we can do that. We could, for example, do it like this. And then we move it up. Like maybe like this. And Then what we need is horizontal cuts, so we would just try to select those edges. Maybe we can do that again. So I go inwards and I move them 6 centimeters upwards. And now I would like to automatically select those edges here. So what I can try is convert the recent selection here from polygons to edges by holding down Shift. And now I have those very edges here. And in order to get these edges next to them, I can go UY. And now I have them selected. But I didn't want to have the original selection. I don't want to keep it, so I go back. And there's one trick, maybe you need it someday, is to create a selection tag. You go to Select, Set Selection, and now whenever I lost that selection up there, so for example because I selected something else, then I can double click that selection and I get them all back for every object. So now I go UY to expand the selection, and now I want to deselect the original, so I go and say deselect edges. Next I can use MF for doing my horizontal cuts. That looks okay. And now all I need to do is going UI to get the other ones again. And maybe I don't want to bevel the bottom one and maybe not the top one. Well, for the top one I could do this again, like deselect edges, but the bottom one remains, so I just need to deselect it from the side. Maybe from here I can hit S to zoom there, and using my rectangle tool holding down Control I should be able to get rid of it. Now let's use MS again and bevel them so they are apart from each other, and go to polygon mode, hitting UI for inverting, and now I delete them. And now in order to get the structure I have in mind, I should only select like select any other ring here. So like this one and this one, this one, this one. In this case I could go UI, but I get too many edges and I don't get the edges of the other guys. So I again have to look at it from the side. And maybe it's easier to do this in 2 rows. Like I need the bottom ones. Or no, rather the, yeah, let's try this, but not the bottom ones. And now we can just pull them down like so. And then I select all the polygons and hit extrude. The other direction will be better. I create caps. This doesn't change anything in this case. And if I wanted to, I could again level them very slightly. But I wouldn't do that. Well, you're not gonna see it from far away anyways. Sorry. Or we can try. I mean, if you want to keep it like that, then we should reduce the font tag so it looks proper like this. And if you want additional detail, then we can go inside the aircon and go MS, apply this, render this out, and don't like it, so 005, it's really minimal, and there we go. Well, probably not necessary. Okay, that's the way how we do the ceiling. So we're basically done with our office. I go to the top and place a camera with perspective view straight to the horizon with a wide lens, even wider. Put it right in the corner. Turn the camera a bit and make sure it's on eye height, and go inside that camera by clicking this little cross here. And it appears my room is a bit, well, not really high, but this is basically how you create an office interior. So now if you are disappointed in comparison to that picture here, then, well, we're still missing the furniture, which is again just a matter, if you look at it, of extrusions, like a polygon extruded here and a polygon extruded inwards. Here the screen is just a flying polygon which has some extrusions, and all the rest, believe me, is just done the same way. Even the keyboards are just grids that have extruded keys. And the pieces of paper are more interesting, so we might have a look inside that original document. It looks like this. It's a lot of copy-paste going on there. And even those sheets of paper are just a polygon, basically split up and cut through, so it has some specialties, or these edges are slightly moved backwards, so it looks like folded paper here. If you look closely, you can see some shades running across there. And yeah, and the rest is lighting, of course. If you have like the document we just created here, then the glass should be transparent, or even easier, not existent. And then you could just use your physical sky for a start, and use a I don't know, maybe early morning. So the light is coming through the ceiling, so we should put a polygon on top, which has just the size of our building, and we can use the original for this. Activating it, and if you look at it from the side, then this will be enough to block the light. And we should choose a very, very low angle for the sun, so it goes inside our room. Something like that looks attractive, and the rest is something you can do with global illumination. If you want to, you could do it like just going to the render settings, effect global illumination, and choose a default interior, preview high diffuse depth. I reduce it to 5, and the rest should be kept rather low. So let's have a look. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. I hope you learned something.